the 13th chapter of Revelation, and we're looking at verse 15 to get our opening text dealing with this idea or this series on the economics of the end. Revelation 13:15 says this, and he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the beast, or worship the image of the beast, I should say, should be killed. And he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their forehead, that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. I like to focus in this text with the idea that both the rich and the poor are identified in the scripture, and both the rich and the poor, the free and the slave, the bond, are all forced to receive a mark that without which they cannot buy or sell. Buy or sell. In other words, this power that we see called the beast, and this power in Revelation 13, verse 11 on down, that is the second beast that forms this image and gives power back to the first beast. These powers so control the economics in the end that they can cause an exclusive community in which this mark or this mark of the beast separates those that are included in the economy of the end and those that are excluded from the economy of the end. And this idea causes us to want to study this idea of the economics of the end and what this idea of buying and selling, and even a closed economy, a controlled economy by this prophetic power. What does this mean to us as God's end time people? I'd like to look at the text in the book of Daniel now. Daniel we're turning to. Look at the book of Daniel, and look at the context in which we must understand this. Daniel, the 11th chapter. Daniel, what chapter are we looking to now? Daniel 11. In Daniel 11, we studied previously, and we found some various amazing truths. And in understanding the economics of the end, we must understand the 11th chapter of Daniel, because this 11th chapter of Daniel is a template for us. It is a yardstick just like Daniel 2. In other words, when we look at the book of Daniel 2, we saw in Daniel 2 a prophetic yardstick that goes from Babylon all the way down to the coming of Christ. We see a prophetic yardstick that shows the rise and fall of various nations or temporal powers from literal Babylon of Nebuchadnezzar all the way down to the setting up of God's kingdom at the end. Can you agree with that? We studied that in depth, and we found that this is not only a temporal line from one kingdom to another kingdom going all the way down. We also see it's an outline of the spiritual nature of the nations and this end time mixing of clay and metal, or church and state. We see this all in this image of Daniel 2, both as a yardstick and as a spiritual indicator. But there are other yardsticks that we can see that can give us, along this great and large yardstick, a closer, more careful understanding of prophecy. Now, I'd like to say something before we look at Daniel 11, something that's very important. This understanding that we're looking at tonight is based upon a biblical understanding of prophecy. And I want to submit to you that all the prophecies of the Bible stand and fall upon the principles of the Bible. I don't want to even put it in the context of Adventism, because many people think that these are Adventist interpretations. They're not Adventist interpretation. And Adventist interpretation is an erroneous interpretation, because many Adventists that I know have their own private interpretation. And Adventist interpretation is a private interpretation. A biblical interpretation is a true interpretation. Now, I know someone would take that statement and try and run and make all kinds of arguments concerning that, but the being of an Adventist means nothing if you don't have a true biblical understanding. If you have wrong principles of biblical interpretation, you are going to make a wrong conclusion. If you cannot rightly divide the word of truth, no matter what you call yourself, then you're going to come to a wrong application. There are many Adventists, many people that take the name Adventist that are making wrong understanding, wrong conclusions because of faulty biblical interpretation. Again, before we go to Daniel 11, we have studied here, and we studied these prophecies line upon line and precept upon precept, some principles of biblical interpretation, have we not? Yes, we looked at the Bible and seen that there are texts of Scripture that show us biblical interpretation. If you don't understand the idea of a day for year principle, can you understand the prophecy of the end? No. If you don't understand that Numbers 14 and Ezekiel 4 and many other texts show that in Bible prophecy a day is a year, then you can't understand that we're in the last days, because you can't interpret it. You can't bring yourself down the prophetic chain to the end and see where we are in the stream of time. You can't do it. If you don't believe that there's something called types and shadows, or I should say shadows and examples. What shadows and examples? You look at some text, like say for instance, you look at the book of Hebrews 10, verse 1, Hebrews 8, Colossians 2. All these texts are dealing with shadows. And then Paul says that the things that happened previously, especially when it deals with the sanctuary and the teachings and the priesthood and all the things that were literally done in the sanctuary of the Hebrews, these things were shadows of things to come, shadows of heavenly things. So the idea of shadows means that there is in Bible teaching a principle where, you know what a shadow is? A shadow is something where an object, like say this pulpit, is hit by light, and when it's hit by light, the light that's behind this object casts a shadow to the side of the object. When you look at this shadow, the shadow shows you the form and the shape, and by looking at the form and shape, you can pretty much guess what the object is, but that shadow is not the actual object. If you continue to walk or look toward this object going all the way down, you'll see where this object and the substance meets together, and when you found the object, do you need the shadow anymore? No, it's led you to the object. You actually have the substance now. Paul talks about the things that had shadow, but now not the very image and substance of them. When we come to the actual substance of it, what we're looking at, when we look at the Bible, he teaches these shadows point forward to things to come, or prophetic events, or point forward to heavenly things, or spiritual things. So when we talk about these shadows, the Bible teaches, both in the Old and New Testament, that some things that we see in the Old Testament are prophetic. The literal things of the Hebrews have prophetic implications for the end of the world. In 1 Corinthians 10, it says very clearly the things that happen, literal events that happened to the Jews of old, to the Israelites, have more to do with the end of the world than even what happened to them. Those things were examples or ensamples unto us. This is a principle not only of shadows and image or substance, but also repetition and enlargement. That which happened anciently is going to be repeated. History is going to be repeated, and when it's repeated, it's going to be enlarged, not just in literal local Israel, but future, prophetic, and worldwide. Can you follow that? Without these principles, you can't understand Bible prophecy. It's like trying to understand Japanese without understanding the language. You can hear, and you can hear words, you can even pick out some various letters maybe that are being used, but you can't understand what's being said. You don't understand the language of the Bible. These principles show us the language of the Bible. So when we come to Daniel, the 11th chapter, in Daniel 11 starts out with prophecies that were literally taking place between this last power that we know that existed before the rise of Rome, and this power that existed before Rome, we know as Greece, had a division of its empire, and the Roman Empire started to form, as we see in the early parts of Daniel 11. What we see is a battle between what we call the king of the north and the king of the south. And the literal king of the north had a temporal dominion, and the literal king of the south had a temporal dominion, and the literal king of the north had a dominion in Babylon. The literal king of the south had a dominion in Egypt. That's found in Daniel 11, and the history we see there prophetically outlined from then to the close of probation. Daniel 11 deals with this time of Greece and Rome all the way to the close of probation. Are you still together with me? Oh, I hope you are. Because Daniel 11 is a large chapter. In Daniel 11, we see this literal king of the north and literal king of the south, and hundreds and hundreds of years pass as these two nations, these two powers, battle with each other, Babylon and Egypt. Now, we come down through Daniel 11 when it shows even in Rome, when Rome becomes the king of the north, we see this battle between Rome, or king of the north, and Egypt continuing. Even we come down to the crucifixion of Christ. Now, in Daniel 11, when Christ is crucified, you have now a shift or a change in Daniel 11 from a literal local fulfilling of events and prophecies to a future worldwide application of these previously literal things. What do I mean by that? The king of the north and the king of the south, the location of the king of the north and the king of the south, the work of the king of the north and the king of the south, after the destruction or the crucifying of Christ, as it says in Daniel chapter 11 and verse, let me drop my eyes on it very quickly. Verse 22. In Daniel 11:22 it says, "And with a flood of arms he shall be overthrown from before him, and shall be broken, yea, also the prince of the covenant." This breaking of the prince of the covenant, Christ is the prince of the covenant. What covenant? That covenant of Daniel chapter 9 that's spoken of that he would confirm for 1 week. That prince of the covenant will be broken by this power. And when this takes place, now we see a shift where we're not talking about the literal king of the north in literal Babylon, but spiritual Babylon, a spiritual king of the north. We're not talking about a literal king of the south in literal Egypt. We're talking about a spiritual Egypt, a spiritual king of the south. Can you agree with that? It's talking about not these nations in Asia Minor anymore. It's talking about a future worldwide world, because after the gospel is received by the disciples and the Pentecostal power comes, now this is a universal into all the world message, and this king of the north and king of the south and their battle is now imagery, is now a shadow of things to come. Biblical interpretation. Without seeing the demarcation line of Christ's crucifixion and what happens before and after, this line between the Israelite realm and the New Testament realm, then we're going to make a wrong application there. We're not going to see this future worldwide application. So, as we come down to Daniel chapter 11 and verse 40, Daniel 11 and verse 40, we're talking about the economics of the end. Don't lose that thought. The economics of the end. When we come to Daniel 11 and verse 40, we see a very important historical event take place that in the book of Daniel we have clearly studied in our previous studies. We come to the time of the end. Time of the what? Time of the end. And in previous studies we looked at Daniel chapter 12, and Daniel 12 showed us what the time of the end was. It showed us this time of the scattering of God's people, or the power of God's people. It started with the beginning of this little horn power, the papal power coming to power, and the end of his power to scatter and persecute God's people. It would be from 538 all the way 1260 years till the year what? 1798. And 1798 would be the time of the end. Daniel 11:40 says this. Daniel 11:40, it says, and at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, meaning the king of the north. So out of the blue, as it were, this king of the south that had not been seen in many texts in the book of Daniel 11:40, for many texts has been gone, now he automatically reemerges in the year 1798 and pushes at the king of the north and does violence to him. And how do we know he's doing violence? Because the book of Daniel 7 shows these two beasts, this he-goat and this ram, and what are they doing? They're pushing to the north and the south and pushing at each other, meaning military power. So this king of the south emerged and put some military power against the king of the north, which we know to be not pagan Rome, but what Rome? Papal Rome. And he brings a military action against him and causes him to be pushed out of the way. The time of the end, what does the prophecy of the Bible tell us about the time of the end? What would happen to the papal power at the time of the end? In Revelation 13, what does it say would happen to him? He should receive a deadly wound. And that deadly wound simply is the separation of church and state, the separation of this so-called church from temporal power. This will happen in the year 1798. And we've identified in our previous studies who this king of the south would be, because we know this king of the south is a spiritual king of the south, a spiritual one. And we looked in the book of Revelation 11, and Revelation 11 says and shows us who is spiritually Egypt. Remember where the king of the south was. He was in where? Egypt. Who was spiritual Egypt according to Revelation 11? Revelation 11 shows what is spiritual Egypt and spiritual Sodom, which will come up in the last days and would foment the governmental or even the power politically that would push against the papacy and give it its deadly wound. This was done through the medium of the nation of France under the power of this atheistic and even licentious power called spiritual Egypt and Sodom. This is the power of the French Revolution, the power of all the atheism and all the teaching that came into the French Revolution. This is what took over France and caused Napoleon to send Berthier to Rome and to take the Pope. Are we still together? We're in Daniel 11 and verse 40. We're talking about the economics of the end. And in Daniel 11:40, we have been, as the people of God, looking for certain spiritual events. Because in Daniel 11:40, we know that just as it said in 1798, the king of the south came up, and this power that came out of the French Revolution, this power that came out of France, this power that took over France and all the world to a great degree, this power pushed at the papacy and wounded him, and this power, known as the king of the north or the papacy, will receive a deadly wound. But Revelation 13 says a deadly wound would be healed. So this people that have all this prophetic understanding and are looking for these events to take place, they know in 1798 that this power would be wounded, but they were looking for an event. What was that event? The healing of the deadly wound, because it says here in Daniel 11:40 this, Daniel 11:40, and at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and horsemen, and with many ships, and he shall enter into the countries, and shall overflow and pass over. What shall happen to the king of the north eventually? He will revive. He was pushed out of the way, but he's coming what? Back again. And he's coming back with what? Chariots. And he's coming back with armies. He's going to overflow and do damage to this king of the south. So even though in 1798, follow me now, even though in 1798 this took place, we know that there was more than just this time of the end, or this receiving the deadly wound that happened in 1798. Do we know that? Yes. 1798, we also know from the book of Daniel that there would be at this time of the end something prophetic happening in the true church. The Bible said in the book of Daniel that knowledge shall be increased. Men shall run to and fro with the knowledge of the prophecy, especially the little book of Daniel that was sealed, and this would foment or create a great awakening. A great awakening literally from sleep, or spiritually? Spiritually. A great awakening when people already had the Bible, it was a prophetic understanding and a revival and reformation along biblical lines. This great awakening also started in the year 1798, and this great awakening was to give a message based upon the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation, especially dealing with those last chapters of Daniel chapter 11, because they were being fulfilled at that time, especially the 40th verse. Can you see that? Can you see that? Those that were living in the year 1798, if they could understand the prophecy, look at these prophecies, they could see prayerfully that Daniel 11 and verse 40 had taken place. This king of the north had not come back yet, but they were looking in the future for this king of the north to come back and to attack this king of the south and put him down, which meant that this king of the south would have to be on the scene. This power that was taking control of France and that would spread to the whole world would have to be in place and thriving and working and establishing himself in the earth, that this king of the north would come back against him and put him down at some future event. Now let's throw something else inside there. We know from 1798, one of the longest time prophecy was now going to come to its end in one generation. The 2300-day prophecy, which is that day, 4-year principle prophecy, that day, and evening, and morning prophecy, that started in the year 457 BC and comes all the way down to 1844. In about one generation, in about 40 years, that prophecy would come to an end, and there'd be no more, according to Revelation chapter 10, there would be no more prophecies based upon time. Only prophecies based upon what? Events. And the events that we're going to be seeing are outlined very, very clearly in Daniel 11, verse 40 to 45 and on. Because Daniel 11, 40 to 45 show you the events from the wounding of the papacy all the way down to the close of probation. Why do you say the close of probation? Because in Daniel 12 and verse 1, at the very beginning of the next chapter, it says, and Michael shall do what? Stand up, and there shall be a time of trouble, meaning the close of probation, as you put the text together clearly. This is what we're seeing. And brothers and sisters, when we talk about the economics of the end, we as the people of God have been looking for this great event of the coming back of the king of the north and attacking and putting down the king of the south. Now, brothers and sisters, what happened in 1989? In 1989, Ronald Reagan and the Pope of Rome collaborated together, or church and state collaborated together. Church and state began to be what? Healed, in the form of attacking the Soviet Union and then the Western Bloc, and all those nations like dominoes fell one by one, just like right now these Muslim states are falling one by one. Seems familiar, doesn't it? This fall of communism is a part of this destroying of the king of the south. And this was the event in Daniel 11:40 that everyone was looking for, because people were saying, you know what? Jesus hasn't come yet. It's been years. Because you look at 1798 to 1898, how long is that? That's 100 years. And some people that were alive in the 1790s and the 1844, they had died of sin. And people said, man, is Jesus ever coming? And then from 1798 to 1998 is how many more years? That's 100 more years, which makes it altogether 200 years. And now we're in 2000 and almost 12. We're in 2011. We've added some more time. And people say, is Jesus coming? But brothers and sisters, these end time events, especially this economics of the end, people said, well, you know, what is this economic crisis is going on? Brothers and sisters, we are looking for a greater economic crisis, a greater work, because these things must take place, because Daniel 11:40 shows us that we have been looking for a signal event showing the last movements were going to come. What's the signal event? When the king of the north does what? Comes back and puts down the king of the south. When we saw, or when those that were alive saw, because some of you young people weren't alive maybe, when we or the people saw communism fall, there should have been a great revival, a great reformation, because we have been waiting for this. But guess what? When this event happened, almost 200 years after Daniel 11:40 first went into effect, how many people were waiting for it? How many people even knew what happened? Can you imagine that? It's like when Jesus was announced and his coming was announced in the Garden of Eden. Didn't Adam and Eve, didn't their heart thrill? And weren't they excited about the coming of this Messiah? Weren't they happy about those things? So in other words, how much of the world was waiting for Jesus when that announcement was given in the Garden of Eden? The whole world. But when Jesus came, how many people were waiting for him? When Jesus was born, where was he born? Who was waiting for him? Very, very, very few. And similarly, in 1989, when the communist power of Russia was basically broken by this Americo-Papal connection, this coming together of church and state, if you will, this reuniting or this healing of this wound started to solidify. How many people that claim to have been taking this prophecy to and fro were believing and preaching and teaching these things and giving this message because the last moves were coming? Should we not have known? Brothers and sisters, in 1929, we had the first economic collapse of great significance in this country. And in the 1929 economic collapse, this collapse was called the Great Depression. And you go home and you look at documents on the Great Depression, you see that there was tremendous suffering in this country because we did not have what we have today, which causes the illusion of continued prosperity. It's called credit cards, credit. There was no credit back then. If you lost everything, that means you lost everything. If you had no money, guess what? You had no money. You couldn't go into your pocket and do what I know many people do. They run their credit card. They start the month or the week, and they spend all their money the first part of the month, first part of the week. And basically, they live off their credit cards, swiping, until they can get their check. Put that check in, pay off all that they've been eating, and then pay their last little bit of bill. And again, they swipe till the end of the month. And some people have been out of jobs and they have been living off credit cards, putting $30,000 and $40,000 and $50,000 on a credit card until they can get a job and then try and pay it off. Back in the great 1929 Great Depression, when you fell, when there was nothing, there was nothing. People were begging in the streets. There was nothing because the great industrial revolution caused people to leave the farm and come to the cities, and there was no crops. If you had no food, you had no food. Brothers and sisters, that was 1929. And we have had a series of Black Mondays and Black Wednesdays and all these economic collapses all the way through the 80s. We had the same thing. Even in these last few years, we've had the same thing. But what has kept us seemingly afloat, or the Western society seemingly afloat? The illusion of credit. And what does credit mean? It means that you can borrow yourself into slavery. Because the borrower is servant or slave to the lender. He owns you. You have to work off that. You have to pay off that debt. And when we talk about the entire world being in debt and running off credit, Who are they in debt to? And does this mean that they are slowly becoming in servitude so that the Bible can be true? That they will be only rich and, Revelation 13, rich and poor. Let's look at that. You're not with me. Hold your finger in Daniel 11. Look back at the book of Revelation. We're talking about the economics of the end, and we can clearly see what is happening, what is going to happen, and why you and I need to be putting ourselves in position spiritually, temporally, economically to survive what's going to happen. We're in the book of Revelation now. Holding our finger in Daniel 11. Look at the book of Revelation, the economics of the end. Revelation 13. In Revelation 13, we have read this text over and over, but we don't see clearly that this is just two classes that exist in the world when all the economics of the world is captured by the king of the north. When the king of the north captures all, because he has systematically not only broken the nation known as the Soviet Union, but he's broken the economies of the world and broken down the power structure of the financial base of the world so that he is the only and supreme controller of all the riches of the world. In Revelation 13, it says this. In Revelation 13 chapter and verse 16. Say amen if you have that. In Revelation 13 and verse 16 it said, and he caused all. Now notice the definition the Bible gives of all. It is two groups. There are certain terms given, but it only is two groups. It says he caused all. Both what? Both small and great. So how many groups are going to be in the world? Two. They're going to be what? Small and great. Then he can use another very similar opposite. He says rich and poor. Then use another one 3 times. Then he says what? Free and bond. Now, brothers and sisters, please don't ignore that. It says small, great. It says rich, poor. It says free and bond. In other words, either you're going to be small, poor, and a slave, or you're going to be great, rich, and free. 2 groups. But both of these groups are going to be so dependent upon this new world order, if you will, this new geopolitical order, this new papal system, financially and otherwise, that they are going to be excluded from the economics of the world unless this small, poor, and slave class receive the mark. They will not be able to buy or sell. And even those that are great and rich and free, unless they also have this way of access, this medium of access into the economics of the end time, called the mark, called this mark of the beast, they would not be able to buy or sell either. That means they cannot eat, heat their homes, own possessions. They cannot pay for their children's education. They cannot do anything. Even the basic sustenance of life cannot be procured if it's a medium of operating in the economics of the world. You cannot go to the store and buy things at that time. You cannot have a home that has electricity at that time. You cannot have a home that's purchasing things in the economic markets of the world at that time. The economics of the end. And this power, we know at the King of the North, because we know that he has put down the communist power of Russia in 1989, we know that the next event that we were to see is him flood in and completely control the world and the church and the financial powers thereof. Let's look at that in the book of Daniel 11. Daniel 11, it says this. Daniel 11, and we're going to read verse 41, 42, and 43. There must be one ruler of the economics of the world, as well as the religious power of the world and the national or temporal powers of the world, and it will be the king of the north, even through the instrumentality of the second beast of Revelation 13, the American power, strengthening him and militarily supporting him. In Daniel, the 11th chapter, Let's read verse 40, 41, 42, and 43 together. Just to see this timeline outline, because we're seeing all the various events that will come down to the end of time. And as we come tomorrow, we're going to start defining and looking at these things even closer to see exactly what some of these terms mean, and we kind of detail them and how this plays down and brings us down to the close of probation. And if you and I are spiritually, intellectually, and practically preparing to both live and preach and operate and survive during this time. Because either we are or we're not. It says this in Daniel 11 and verse 40. And at the time of the end, which was 1798, correct? Shall the king of the south, which was this power that was controlling France under Berthier and Napoleon, this age of reason from which communism came out of, this secular humanism out of which communism came out of, this idea of no law and no power controlling mind and the mind of man doing whatever it wants, from which the hippie movement and the free love movement and all the political and social revolution of our time and the previous ages came out of, all this in the person of Berthier, the person of Napoleon, took down the Pope in the year 1798. It says this, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships. That's military power. And he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass. So enter into a country. There will be not just one country that will fall. There'll be many countries that will fall. All these powers that are under the control of this king of the south, the spiritual king of the south, they must be taken over, and they are being taken over even through economics. You say China hasn't fallen. Well, China has fallen economically because China is more capitalistic and Western than you may think. That's a whole other subject for tomorrow. Verse 41, and he shall enter into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab and the chief children of Ammon. Now, what's the glorious land? We must understand that, because this is another part of the control that the king of the north must take over the whole world as he moves toward this close of probation and the economics of the end. Because notice what it says, and we go to verse 42. Who is the glorious land? What is the glorious land? Who are the children of Edom and Moab? We must look at that tomorrow. Verse 42. And he shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Edom shall not escape. Verse 43. But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver, and over all the precious things of... Let's stop there. What did the Bible just say that this king of the north will have? Power over the gold and the silver. It says the treasures or the treasuries of gold and silver, and over all precious things. The economics of the end. He must have complete control over these things so that he can exclude you and I, whether we're rich, free and great, or small and poor and slaves. Whether we are in either one of these classes, he can exclude you and me except we receive this mark of the beast. He must control through breaking down and destroying the economies and having his power, his gold. You know how much gold is right now? You know how much the American dollar is worth? You know how much the Canadian dollar is worth? You know how much the Japanese yen is worth? You know how much the German franc is worth? And do you know how much gold is worth? Do you know that gold, do you know how much gold is worth? You know, I hope that I'm not sending this tape around to some thieves. I was thinking in my mind the amount of gold that my mother has. The bracelets, the chains, the things that have been passed down the family. I said, man, I mean, how many ounces of that? I'm just thinking of all the thousands of dollars that these things are worth now. I said, man, boy, I would melt that thing down and buy some DVD burn. I would just, man. as the economies of the world become more and more unstable, and all these dollars and yen and so on, all the system of currency that the world and nations are using become less and less, what becomes more and more prominent? Gold. And when we talk about the economics of the end, and we want to end here and come back tomorrow, when we look at the economics of the end, now we see that even though successively we've been seeing over and over fulfillment of certain prophecies, these prophecies are not going to find their true and full fulfillment until we get past the year 1989. So what we're looking at, since 1989, in many of your lifetime, we're seeing these last movements happening, and the majority of people that first started with this message don't even know what's happening all around. They don't even know that they have access to the message that shows all these things, showing that prophecy can show you 1989 and bring you right down to the close of probation. We can know where we are, right in the stream of time. But most people have no idea that these last movements are happening, these last movements, because soon there will be the last and final economic collapse when spiritual Babylon falls. And notice some text here very quickly. Look at the book of Isaiah as we close. Isaiah 2. Isaiah 2. Before the coming of Christ, not the coming of the King of the North, the coming of Christ, the economy of the world will truly and finally and utterly collapse. But the earthly economies must crumble that the King of the North may be supreme. And he may control and excommunicate all those from the economies or the economy that he controls that do not go along with this new papal order. In Isaiah 2, notice what it says about the end time economic collapse, the final one that associates itself with the coming of Christ. In Isaiah 2, it says this, Isaiah 2, beginning in verse 17, there will be an end time economic collapse, but the great and true one is connected with the scenes immediately before the coming of the Son of Man, even after the close of probation. Notice what it says in Isaiah 2, and we're going to put it all together on our future studies. Isaiah 2 and verse 17 says this, and the loftiness of man shall be bowed down, and the hardness of men shall be made low, and the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day, and the idols shall be utterly abolished. Now stop there. In the book of Exodus, the Bible in the Ten Commandments talks about false gods, or in other words, idols. It said, thou shalt not bow down thyself to them or serve them. Now, serve them means that you will be a servant. A servant is someone who works for wages, or works for money, or works for building of wealth. Not has and possesses wealth, but works to receive a wage. Even the wage of sin is death. If someone is a servant, then they're working for wages. They are working for someone else. The Bible says that you can serve false gods or serve idols. These idols can even that you are worshiping be your reward. That's what it says, Isaiah 2. Verse 18, and the idols shall be utterly abolished. What are these idols that are going to be utterly abolished? And they shall go into the holes of the rocks and in the caves of the earth for fear of who? Fear of the Lord, and for the glory of his majesty when he arrives to shake terribly the earth. In that day a man shall cast his what? Idols of silver, and his idols of what? What does the papacy have control of? Gold and silver, all the treasuries. It says, in that day shall a man cast his idols of silver and his idols of gold, which they have made each one for himself to worship, and to the moles and to the... What does Jesus say? You cannot serve two masters. You either serve God or you serve what? And what's mammon? Money. Those idols, gold and silver, filthy lucre. You can't serve God and mammon. God shows that money is seen to be an idol for which man tries to serve like a false god. This idea of gold and silver is the idol, is the idolatry of this age. When Jesus comes, men will be hiding in the rocks and the mountains. And they will do what to the money, to the gold and silver that they have even received the mark of the beast so they can have? They'll cast it away to the moles. Where are the moles and bats? You know where moles live? Under the ground. They burrow there in darkness. They'll throw it in the dirt. Where do bats live? In dark caves. Throw it in the caves. Which each of them made for himself to worship, to the moles in the back. Verse 21, to go into the clefts of the rocks and the tops of the ragged rocks for fear of the Lord and for the glory of his majesty when he arrived to terribly shake the earth. Last text, Luke. Oh, beg your pardon. Last text is in the book of James. I'm sorry. The book of James. Let's end here. In the book of James, we see a prophecy concerning the end times. And in James 5, notice what it says here, which is more true after 1989 than before. Yes, there was economic collapse in 1929, but all these things have been moving in a definite pattern, but these events have their true significance and their true power and force after 1989, because after 1989, we see these last movements of this papal power, this resurgence, and this acquisition of all the precious things and all the treasures of gold. It must be a destruction of the former world order, the former financial order, to establish this new one. But notice what it says, James 5 and verse 1. It says, go to now ye what? Are these the men that we see in Revelation 13? Some of them are right here. Go to now ye rich men, weep and howl for your misery that shall come upon you. That means prophecy, future events. Your riches are corrupted and your garments are. It means that the power, the financial power, the riches, the wealth, the economy shall be corrupted. They shall be destroyed. To corrupt means to decay, to become destroyed. To weaken. Has the dollar weakened? Has the yen weakened? Has all these instruments of trade have weakened. Your riches are corrupted. Your garments are righteousness. Your covering is moth-eaten. Your gold and silver is what? Or what? Rusted or useless. The rust of them shall be a witness against you and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. Ye have heaped treasure together for the last days. Incredible wealth developing. Now, there's been incredible wealth ever since the 1790s. Incredible wealth has been building ever since the time of the end. Incredible wealth has been building and building and building and building, but not since like 1980s. It's been even more. You ever heard of Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, and on and on and on? It says, ye have heaped treasure together for the last days, the economics of the end. Behold the hire of your laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is kept back by fraud, 1989 to today. Cries and the cries of them that have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. It says, verse 7, let's drop to the main point there. Verse 7 says, be patient therefore, brethren, until when? The coming of the Lord. In other words, these events precede the coming of Christ. These events precede the last movements when the economy must start to crumble and the gold and the silver that they have is starting to wane. Now, brothers and sisters, when we look at this idea of gold and silver, we must understand this idea of how it relates to the economy and literal gold, how it relates to this old system of finance that's coming to an end, and this new papal system, this so-called free market economy, and the coming closed market economy, where only those that have the mark of the beast are able to buy and sell. And what will happen to the people of God at that time? What will happen to the preaching of the word? What happened to the living of God's people? What happened to the power of the lasting movements? Will we have the internet at that time? And DVDs and websites? We have to do what we can, what we are able to now, but we have to make preparation spiritually, intellectually, and practically for that day. For what? The economics, spiritually and temporally, of the end. Let's have a word of prayer as we close. Heavenly Father, we have heard some things concerning this last movement that Jesus is trying to prepare people for. Those people that have the faith of Jesus in these last days, the love of Christ, also will have the light of Christ. The Bible says that this light shineth in darkness as into a dark place until the day dawn and the day star, meaning Jesus, arise in their hearts. As all these prophetic events are rising, correspondingly, there must be a rising, a elevation of Christ in the heart, a realization of the character of Christ. As the enemy comes into the flood, the Spirit of the Lord will raise up a standard against them, even the character and power of Christ in the hearts and minds of his believers. Lord, help us to see the need of the true riches, the true goal of love, the true goal of obedience, the true goal of faith in the character. We need the true riches, dear God, tonight, along with eyesight, that we might be able, when all the gold of this world and all the silver and all the precious things of this earthly realm are gathered together by spiritual Babylon, by the king of the north, that the people of God will truly be in possession of the precious things, truly be in possession of the glorious power of true gold. Refine us, dear God. We know that gold is made more precious by the refining process. We know that all that we see around us, even happening, is prepared to refine us and make us pure gold. Strengthen us to that end. Help us as we continue to study this topic and even go further in our next study, that we would see clearer this prophetic line found in the 11th chapter of Daniel that shows us the economics of the end and the need of having that gold tried in the fire, that burnished gold that only Christ can give, within our hearts and minds. For we ask it all in Jesus' name. Amen.